Hi you guys, this is Rachel Kirkland here, the Modern Shaman. Thanks for being with me for another YouTube Q&A video time. If you're new to the channel, I always encourage you to go to my website, which is themodernshaman.net. There is a ton of resources there, and it's a great connection point if you'd like individual sessions for shamanic healing or seership, which is typical psychic sessions as well. Those are all available on the website. My teaching modules and downloadable videos are all available there for more specifics and training in your metaphysical connections, as well as any touring that I'm doing or any sort of further connection, whether it be mentorship or joining us for the live times on Facebook when I do these Q&As live. There's a great kind of source or hub of information on the website, and I hope you check it out. So we're going to dive into the question of this week and get on with it. So here it is. I'm just going to read it. It says, "Hi Rachel, I have all my clairs open, but my dominant clair is clairsentience. I feel everything, LOL. Even the static in the air. How can I turn this down? Definitely not off, but I want to start strengthening my other clairs." Okay. Great question, and this is a little bit more technical. So for those of you guys that are familiar with the psychic senses and that terminology of my clairs, we get into this realm and we kind of talk our language. We talk our talk, right? So let's define that a little bit for maybe any of you guys that are new to this conversation or just jumping in for the first time, or just unfamiliar with the psychic senses and the parapsychology that has gone into defining extrasensory perception, ESP, or sometimes MSP, multisensory perception. So those defined senses are known as the clairs, and as she described, hers is her dominant is clairsentience. So in terms of the clairs, we have claircognizance, which is the knowing, like I know, I just know I know, and that is a type of psychic gift or a defined extrasensory perception beyond just our typical knowledge. It is also associated, if you're familiar with Gardner's, so the Harvard psychologist, I think it's Howard or Herman Gardner, I don't know, Mr. Gardner, came up with the multiple intelligences theory, or kind of having intelligences in the way that we learn, typical learners. So just from psychology, our parapsychology community also has our terms, and they're very comparable to our traditional senses within the way that we learn, the way that we receive information and downloads, and the way that our mind, body, and soul process the information that's coming in. So claircognizance is similar to a logical learner, right? Someone who is learning logically and systematically. Claircognizance is the knowing and the kind of systematic knowing, but it's not from just the logic of those around. It's from the para-logic, or something coming in that doesn't necessarily have a sense of linear understanding, and yet we know it to be true. We know someone's going to call, and they call. We have an interaction with someone, and we just know that this is not going to turn out well. A lot of times they're very general awareness in our logical mind. That is the psychic sense or the extrasensory perception of claircognizance. Clairsentience is the one that you described, and this is also connected to like a kinesthetic learner, someone who learns through the feeling tone of things. It also can be associated with spatial awareness and spatial learners. So a lot of times people in the parapsychology realm will say that they have the extrasensory perception of clairsentience. When this is highly refined, like you described, you can literally feel the static in the air. You feel the shift when someone walks into the spatial room and their energy is different or more dominant than someone else in the room. You pick up on emotional energy and extreme sense of that, or another refined expression of that is an empath, where they are reading the emotional charge in the energetic expression of another. And these are those that are sensitive to the feeling tone of non-physical energy. So they're picking up on the sensations and the feelings of non-physical communication. Then there are clairvoyants, and this is the visual learners, right? If we're looking at the psychology way of describing that type of learner. Parapsychology and the extrasensory perception, we would call this clairvoyance. So this is the intuitive awareness of getting premonition, vision ahead of time. This is also typically those who, when you're speaking to someone, are getting visuals of what you're speaking of. Oftentimes we don't even know that we are clairvoyant, but we're getting visions all the time when we're in discussions with people, and we're not taking the time to validate it. They may be talking about their little dog, and we're getting images of a poodle with a certain collar, and it takes a second or a trained sense of trying to develop that muscle to say, slow down. Do you have a poodle? Does it have this collar? And this is our refined sense of clairvoyance. This is also inclusive of our dream space. So those that have premonition dreams, or where the dream space is highly active, they're connecting to past loved ones through dreams, they're lucid dreaming, they're having out-of-body experiences that are very visual in their context. That would be the extrasensory perception of clairvoyance. Then we have, clairaudience. Clairaudience is the sound. So this would be our auditory learners, those who are musically inclined, those who, because it's inclusive of frequency and harmonies, and who are auditory learners, who can listen to a book on tape and can pick up the information. In our parapsychology world and our extrasensory psychic perception, these are those who hear spirit dialogue, who have a very refined sense of inner dialogue, even with their higher self, with their own conscience, telling them turn right, turn left, don't do this, do this. This would be the best scenario for you to take. And there's oftentimes, when you are dominantly clairaudient, this dialogue on your inner in your inner realm has been going on for so long that you just assume this is how everybody hears the world, how everybody lives and their brain works, and it's not the case for everyone. So those that are dominantly clairaudient are oftentimes really skilled with mediumship, connecting to channeling and transferring auditory messages from non-physical communication, non-physical entities or situations, able to translate those things that are coming through in downloads and other realms beyond just this physical. And then you have the other two psychic senses, which are a little bit more, less common. Clairgustient, which is the sensation of taste, getting tastes when it is a non-physical taste. And oftentimes people that are skilled with this will have a strong medical intuition. And that extrasensory perception, it's not the literal taste, it's the sensation of the taste, but it does make your glands salivate, it does make your body physically respond. Then there's claircentrist, like a scent, and that is the nose, or smelling through the olfactics a scent that is non-physical. Oftentimes these last two psychic senses overlap, or they are inclusive of other clairs, and those clairs oftentimes have to do with seeing something and then they'll smell it, or kind of the overlapping sensory perception there. And the scent, oftentimes, like people will be in a room and they'll smell smoke and smoke is not there, or they'll smell their grandfather's pipe if he smoked a particular scent or had something that was very connected to a past loved one. Our olfactic senses are very strong, and a lot of times that's a strong psychic trigger for those to move into communication with those that have passed or that are not physically present. So out of those clairs, like I said, a lot of times they work in comparative awareness of our multisensory perception, as well as our psychology and just our multiple intelligences, the way that humans process information. It's not that different, although it is intuitive, non-physical information in the way that we process it through our bodies. So when you are dominantly clairsentient, like you shared, and most of us are, I should say, side note here, most of us have a dominant psychic sense, just as most of us have a dominant intelligence type. If you've ever taken those intelligence tests, and they're very broad and sweeping, like they're always coming out. I think they started with 7 and now there's 9 intelligences. And same is true in parapsychology when we first kind of sought out to differentiate between the types of psychic gifts and the extrasensory perception. They found that they kind of overlap, and a lot of times they feed into one another, so they're not as defined as our physical senses, right? Sight is very different than hearing. Well, in the psychic realm, because these are multidimensional in their essence, we tend to overlap them, and we may actually feel a color more than we see a color. This is also called synesthesia, when our senses in the material realm start to blend. This is a type of multidimensional higher level intelligence, and oftentimes this is the case with our extrasensory perception. They help and feed into one another. But we will typically have a dominant psychic sense. And when this is the case, I love your question because, like I said, it gets more technical when you start developing your skills. And I will say in here that I have in my masterclass curriculum, I have modules. One of the modules at the front, it's probably module like 4 or 5, goes over each of these psychic senses and helps kind of give practices to identify which ones you have in terms of your extrasensory perception and which ones are dominant, and then how to strengthen each of these. I also have individual modules on meditation practices, technique practices to strengthen each of the psychic gifts, so you can kind of develop that muscle. Just like any other muscle, if we don't use it, it begins to atrophy. So there are exercises there in my master level curriculum classes online that are downloadable, and those are there for you if you want to get real specific about this and get into, like Rocky Balboa and like get into your training program. That's available to you on the website in the video downloadable modules. But when you go into the techniques here, I love this because oftentimes people talk about the psychic senses when you're feeling overwhelmed, and they give you protection techniques, okay? This is different than learning the refined techniques of how to use your gifts to kind of move in and out with a sense of technical acumen, right? When you are trying to refine your gifts, you begin to learn almost like the detailed aspects, not just protection, not just like I want to turn it off. I like that you said, I don't want to turn it off. I just want to learn how to turn it down. And that, my friend, is the technical aspect of using your gifts to strengthen and to kind of grow in your capabilities, instead of just throwing the baby out with the bathwater and being like, I don't want to feel overwhelmed, so I'm just going to turn it all off, which a lot of people do at the beginning. You're at a different level, which is saying, I've identified that this is my dominant psychic sense, and I don't want it to overwhelm me, but instead I want to be able to use techniques to turn it down in order to strengthen the others. So I just want to give you a little applaud on that. All right, so I want to go through a few different aspects of this. And I'm going to try and broaden it a little bit in case clairsentient is not your dominant psychic sense. I'll try to be a little bit more inclusive about some techniques here for those of you that may be more clairaudient, clairvoyant, claircognizant, some other techniques that will also help you. So the first piece of advice I would give you is, when you are out and about and living your life and you have that experience of it, like you said, it's so strong that it's almost like you can feel the static in the air. So the first piece of advice is experience it first, okay? This is different than protection or shielding from yourself or setting a psychic boundary. This is when you're in the middle and living and in this immediacy of life, and something comes up and your spidey sense is like turned on to a high level. and you're feeling this extreme sense of static electricity, or there's something very heavily charged. And I'm just going to use that as example for clairsentience, because it's a sensory reaction. When you're in that moment of sensory reaction, you need to have a technique that is in equivalent nature with how you're experiencing the energy coming to you. So if you're experiencing it like static electricity, then you move into a sense of turning down that static. And the only way that you can do this is to practice it in those times, okay? Getting yourself in those situations, or being out in those busy environments, or whatever it is that charges that. In that moment, you move into a technique that is an exact equivalent of turning that down, okay? And when I say exact equivalent, I mean if you're experiencing it like static, then essentially how do you get rid of static? One of the ways that we know to get rid of static is to shift the material form. So if you've ever had like a dryer sheet that gets rid of static electricity in a dryer, you have a different material form. It is a literal sheet, and you rub it on the clothing, or you put it in there, and it moves, and it causes a literal discharge of energy. And so if you're experiencing it like a charge of energy, like this, like static electricity, then you're going to want to physically, because again, you're clairsentient, so it's a physical sense of reaction in the body, you're going to want to discharge it physically as well. So just like that, you can literally hold your palm and relieve where you're feeling that energy. Okay, some people do it with flicks like this. When you think of static electricity, also, you think of shocks when something suddenly touches you, like if you open a car door and you suddenly shock yourself, or somebody has been jumping on a trampoline or rubbing against another frictional object, and their hair looks like, Einstein. It's all staticky and frizzed out. And the way to discharge that energy is from another physical contact of pulling that energy down. So you're going to want to do that in an equivalent manner, all right? If it's physical, you're going to want to discharge it physically. And some of those ways, this, like literally rubbing, as if you've got like a cloth, but your hand is doing that same, another material form to discharge the energy. You can also flick off. You can also take your palm once you've kind of pulled it and you feel like your hands maybe have that sense of charge, and you can place them on the floor. You can place them on a rug, or again, a different material compound that's going to hold or let the discharge of the energy move into it, just like a grounding cord if the energy is electrical, like that. The key to this is it needs to be equivalent in nature in order for your psychic senses to register it quickly. And when you're clairsentient and dominantly clairsentient, you don't want to move to a technique that is not clairsentient, okay? And this is where I feel like a lot of teachers and instructors miss the point. They'll say, okay, well, you just visualize a grounding cord. Well, now you're moving into clairvoyance. And if you're not dominantly clairvoyant, then the grounding cord and the visual of a grounding cord coming out of your root chakra, and this is what a lot of teachers will teach, it doesn't feel as strong because you're experiencing the sensation very tactile. So you need a tactile form of shift, of releasing the energy, of turning down the energy, right? So you can physically discharge the energy this way. You can also physically like have a sense of tuning it down. So if you look at your fist and you can almost like rub, or you have a sensational kind of go-to where this is your turning down, turning down, turning down. If I kind of twist it this way, turning down, almost like a knob, but you're doing it in a tactile form. That is the key, that it be equivalent in the nature that you're receiving the psychic information or overload. So if you're clairaudient, then it works great in a technique to have like an auditory volume knob. And we practice this in some of my courses. Practice muting the voices, practice turning the knob down to where you can hear it, but just practice making it quieter, louder, louder. And when you practice this, literally like a technique, then you get used to it. If you're dominantly clairaudient, this is fantastic to do. When the voices are too loud and you're in a room and it feels chaotic and everybody's spirits are talking, I need the volume knob, right? Or I need the mute knob when I'm trying to make a decision and everything is too or whatever it may be. If you're clairvoyant and predominantly clairvoyant, then the visual of just, and I go to this all the time, the visual like we have on our phones or our screens, we have that dimmer, right? Or a dimmer in the light in the room. We have those screen dimmers or the light dimmer, or I just need to dim the vision a bit. Okay, I need to make it not as loud or as vibrant, because oftentimes, at least for me, and the way my clairvoyant visions come up, is I will be having communications, and it's almost like an overlay or a transparent vision of what's going on, or of communication about what's going on, or of communication of what could happen in the future. And sometimes it kind of overlays in the person, and it's very distracting to having that conversation, especially if it's really passionate or vibrant. And so the dimmer switch of like, I'm just going to turn that screen down a little bit and make it less bright. I'm going to turn it down just a bit. These are the smaller aspects of refining your gifts, of not necessarily, like I said, if you're moving into psychic boundaries and we're having that discussion, those are rules, regulations, and they just almost say, no, I don't want it. I'm going to put it over here. I don't want that coming into my house. I don't want that. I'm stopping that conversation. This level of technique and skill is learning to kind of dial up or dial down the strength of the information that you're getting. And this is so powerful, especially if you're clairsentient, because it can feel very physically overwhelming. Okay, this is also true of the interior of your body, because if you're clairsentient, oftentimes this is inclusive of all of your organs, meaning you may feel nauseous, you may get headaches, you may get all of the real sensations in the body from the non-physical energy. And if you don't have that static electricity kind of dial down, or a physical representation of turning it down. I'm using my knuckles as sort of a dial, but you can do that in any way. You can also have a sense of a light switch, a switch that's turning on and turning off, but that is not necessarily a dimmer. You'd have to switch it into a dimmer. But the key is that it's sensational when you do it, because you are experiencing the sensation physically. You want to turn that down. And if you're experiencing it like on the top of your head, then you would want to go straight into the equivalency with that, like clean it off of your head. Clean it off of your head. If you're experiencing pain in the back or sharp aspects, if you're physically feeling nauseous or your throat is being clogged and tightened, whatever it may be, then you may need to cough, you may need to spit, you may need to clear the belly with a sense of guttural expression. It needs to be an equivalent of the way that the energy is coming at you. Otherwise, it won't have the potency, because that's not an accurate way of the way you're receiving it. Like I said, don't go to a clairvoyant and try to see a grounding cord or see a dial turning down. If you're experiencing it physically, go to the physical release or discharge of the energy. All right, I'm getting long. This video is getting long, so I'm going to stop it here. And I want to encourage you guys also. I know I mentioned it in the middle of the video, but if you want to learn more techniques, that's why I created the masterclass. It's there for you. It's a lot of resources for those that want to dive deeper. And you can just go module by module, looking at what it is that you're interested in and would really like to grow, or you can do the entirety of the class from beginner level to master level, which is the way it was created. But I am sending you love on your journey. We'll be back here next week with another video. Bye, guys.